Alex Carter had always been the quiet type, the kind of person who preferred staying out of drama and focusing on his work. He lived in a cozy suburban neighborhood where everyone seemed to know each other, or at least pretended to. The houses were all neatly painted, the lawns perfectly trimmed, and the streets so quiet you could hear birds chirping in the early mornings. To most people, Alex was just another face in the crowd. But what no one realized was that Alex wasn't your average neighbor. He owned a solar energy company that supplied power to thousands of homes across the region, including the very grid that kept their lights on. Alex loved his job. It gave him purpose, knowing he was helping reduce carbon footprints and making clean energy accessible to families. So when he decided to install solar panels on his roof, it felt like a natural step. Not only would they power his home, but they'd also feed extra energy back into the grid, supporting the community during peak hours or emergencies. He thought his neighbors might appreciate the effort. After all, renewable energy was good for everyone, right? Wrong. Enter Karen Thompson, the self-proclaimed queen of the Homeowners Association, HOA. Karen was infamous for micromanaging every detail of the neighborhood's appearance. If someone planted flowers in the wrong color scheme or left a garden gnome too close to the sidewalk, Karen made sure they heard about it. She prided herself on maintaining property values, though many suspected she just enjoyed bossing people around. When Alex's solar panels went up, Karen marched straight to his door, clipboard in hand. "These things are an eyesore," she declared, pointing dramatically at the sleek black panels glinting in the sunlight. "They don't match the aesthetic of our neighborhood." Alex blinked, caught off guard by her tone. "Karen, these panels generate clean energy. They're actually really beneficial, not just for me, but for the environment." Karen waved her hand dismissively. "Environment, schmirement. This isn't some hippie commune. It's a respectable neighborhood. You need to take them down." Alex tried to explain further, mentioning tax incentives, lower utility bills, and even offering to share information with anyone interested. But Karen wasn't listening. Her mind was made up. Solar panels were ugly, and ugly things didn't belong in her perfect little world. What Karen didn't realize, and hadn't bothered to ask, was how significant Alex's role truly was. His company wasn't just any solar provider. It was one of the largest in the state. And while Alex kept that fact under wraps, preferring not to draw attention to himself, Karen's stubbornness was starting to wear thin. Little did she know, her campaign against Alex's panels was about to spiral into something far bigger than either of them anticipated. As tensions simmered beneath the surface, Alex couldn't help but wonder if Karen would ever understand the irony of her actions. After all, the same technology she despised was keeping her lights on. And soon enough, she'd learn exactly how deep the rabbit hole went. The situation between Alex and Karen escalated quickly, though not in the way either of them expected. After their initial confrontation, Alex hoped Karen would calm down and see reason. He even sent her a polite email outlining the benefits of solar panels, including how they could save money on electricity bills and help reduce pollution. But instead of softening her stance, Karen grew more determined to have the panels removed. She called an emergency HOA meeting, where she passionately argued that Alex's unsightly installation was ruining the neighborhood's charm. Karen's theatrics swayed some members of the HOA board, who were either too intimidated by her or simply didn't want to rock the boat. A formal letter soon arrived at Alex's doorstep, demanding he remove the panels within 30 days or face penalties. The tone was firm, almost threatening, but Alex refused to back down. He knew his rights. The state had laws protecting homeowners who installed renewable energy systems, and he wasn't about to let Karen bully him into compliance. Still, he tried one last time to reason with her, sending a follow-up note explaining that his panels weren't just functional. They contributed to the community's energy supply. Karen ignored it completely. Frustrated and running out of patience, Karen decided to take matters into her own hands. Using her influence as head of the HOA, She convinced the board to cut off Alex's connection to the main power grid. Her logic? If Alex relied solely on his solar panels, he'd eventually cave under the inconvenience and remove them. It was a bold move, one that left several board members uneasy, but no one dared challenge Karen. With a smug smile, she gave the order, confident that this would be the end of the issue. What Karen failed to consider, however, was that Alex's solar setup was far more advanced than your average rooftop system. His panels weren't just decorative. They were part of a cutting-edge energy solution designed to power his entire home independently. Even without the grid, his lights stayed on, his refrigerator kept humming, and his Wi-Fi remained blazing fast. In fact, thanks to his company's infrastructure, Alex's house was equipped with battery storage capable of powering his home for weeks if necessary. For him, losing access to the grid was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. But here's where things got interesting. Alex's company didn't just supply his house with energy. It also provided backup power to the entire neighborhood during outages. This meant that while Alex continued living comfortably, the rest of the community remained vulnerable to disruptions. Karen assumed her plan would cripple Alex, forcing him to surrender. Instead, she had unknowingly set the stage for a much larger showdown, one that would expose her ignorance and leave her scrambling to save face. As the days passed, Alex watched with quiet amusement as Karen strutted around the neighborhood, clearly expecting him to come crawling back. Little did she know, her actions were about to teach her a lesson she wouldn't soon forget. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Alex either. By trying to shut him down, Karen had inadvertently highlighted the very thing she despised most, the undeniable importance of renewable energy. And when the next storm hit, plunging the entire neighborhood into darkness, Alex knew exactly how the story would unfold. It didn't take long for the neighborhood to realize that Karen's decision to cut Alex off from the grid was a colossal mistake. A few days after the power disconnection, a fierce autumn storm rolled in, bringing with it howling winds and torrential rain. The storm was so severe that it knocked out the main power lines supplying electricity to the entire subdivision. One by one, homes went dark as transformers blew and wires snapped under the strain. Panic spread quickly among the residents. Parents scrambled to find flashlights, kids whined about canceled TV shows, and refrigerators full of groceries began warming up ominously. But amidst the chaos, there was one house that stood out like a beacon, Alex's. While everyone else fumbled in the dark, his home remained bathed in warm, steady light. His solar panels continued working flawlessly, drawing energy from the overcast skies and powering his household without interruption. Even more impressively, his backup battery system ensured nothing in his daily routine was disrupted. Inside, Alex brewed coffee, charged his phone, and even streamed music as if nothing unusual was happening outside. Curiosity soon got the better of Alex's neighbors. They couldn't help but notice the glowing windows of his house against the backdrop of a pitch-black street. At first, they assumed he must have a generator running, but no loud humming or fumes gave it away. Finally, someone worked up the courage to knock on his door. It was Mr. Peterson, an elderly man who lived 2 doors down. "Alex," he said sheepishly, clutching a flashlight, "how are you still lit up like Times Square, while the rest of us are sitting here in the dark?" Alex opened the door with a friendly smile. "Oh, it's all thanks to these," he replied, gesturing toward the solar panels on his roof. He explained how the system worked, emphasizing that it not only powered his home, but also stored excess energy for situations like this. Then, almost casually, he added, "And actually, my company supplies backup power to the grid during outages, so technically, we could have kept things running smoothly for everyone if certain decisions hadn't been made recently." The news spread faster than wildfire. Neighbors started showing up at Alex's doorstep, asking questions and marveling at his setup. Some were genuinely interested in learning more, while others simply wanted to vent their frustrations about being left in the dark, literally and figuratively. By the time Karen caught wind of what was happening, Alex's driveway had turned into an impromptu gathering spot. People laughed, shared snacks by candlelight, and joked about forming a solar club led by Alex. Karen, meanwhile, was seething. She watched from her own dimly lit living room as her neighbors chatted happily with Alex, many of them throwing side-eyed glances in her direction. Her attempt to punish him had backfired spectacularly, turning him into something of a local hero. Worse yet, she realized she'd inadvertently highlighted the very thing she hated most. Alex's solar panels were now the talk of the town, for all the right reasons. As the night wore on, whispers turned into outright complaints aimed at Karen. "Why did she pick a fight with the one guy who can keep our lights on?" muttered Mrs. Dawson, clutching a half-melted ice cream container. Another neighbor chimed in. "If anything, we should be thanking him." Karen tried to ignore the murmurs, but deep down, she knew she'd made a grave error. What started as a petty vendetta was quickly spiraling out of control, and it was only a matter of time before karma came knocking at her door. The next morning, Karen woke up to a neighborhood buzzing with quiet rebellion. Word had spread like wildfire about Alex's solar-powered resilience during the storm, and it seemed everyone had an opinion about it, most of which weren't favorable toward her. As she stepped outside to grab the newspaper, she was met with awkward stares from her neighbors. Some avoided eye contact altogether, while others gave her polite but strained smiles that felt more like thinly veiled judgment. It was clear her authority as the HOA enforcer was slipping. Determined to regain control, Karen called an emergency HOA meeting for later that evening. She plastered flyers on every doorstep, demanding attendance under the guise of addressing community concerns. But deep down, she knew this was her chance to strike back at Alex and salvage what little respect she had left. When the residents gathered in the community center, Karen took center stage, clutching her clipboard like a shield. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice sharp and accusatory, "we need to talk about fairness. Alex Carter is hoarding electricity while the rest of us suffer through blackouts. He has no right to keep all this power for himself when we're struggling without basic necessities." Her dramatic declaration was met with stunned silence, followed by murmurs of confusion. One brave neighbor raised his hand. Karen, isn't his house powered by solar panels? And didn't he say his company helps supply backup power to the grid?" Karen faltered for a moment but quickly recovered. "Exactly. His company is supposed to support all of us, not just him. Clearly, he's withholding resources out of spite because of our disagreement over those eyesores on his roof." Alex, who had been sitting quietly in the back, leaned forward with a calm expression. "Actually, Karen," he said, standing up so everyone could see him, "my company did offer backup power to the grid during the outage. However, recent actions by certain members of the HOA," he glanced pointedly at Karen, "have temporarily suspended that support until the board resolves its stance on renewable energy policies." The room erupted into whispers. Residents exchanged glances, some nodding thoughtfully while others shot disapproving looks at Karen. The pieces were finally coming together. Karen's vendetta against Alex wasn't just personal. It had real consequences for the entire community. Without backup power from Alex's company, they were left completely vulnerable during emergencies. For the first time, many neighbors began to question whether Karen's obsession with aesthetics was worth the trouble it caused. Desperate to deflect blame, Karen tried to rally support. "This isn't about me or Alex," she insisted. "It's about maintaining standards. We can't let one person dictate how our neighborhood looks." But her words fell flat. Another neighbor stood up, a young mother named Lisa. "With all due respect, Karen, I care more about keeping my kids warm and safe than whether someone's roof matches your idea of pretty. Maybe it's time we rethink these rules." Karen's face flushed red as murmurs of agreement filled the room. For once, she found herself outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Her attempts to paint Alex as the villain had only highlighted her own stubbornness. And now, the tide was turning against her. As the meeting dragged on, It became painfully obvious that Karen's grip on the HOA was loosening. Worse still, Alex hadn't even needed to fight back. The facts spoke for themselves. By the end of the evening, Karen slunk home defeated, her clipboard tucked under her arm like a useless relic. The neighborhood, however, buzzed with newfound excitement. People were talking openly about sustainability, solar energy, and the possibility of working with Alex to make their community stronger. For Karen, the lesson was sinking in slowly but surely. Sometimes, trying to dim someone else's light only makes yours burn brighter. The days following the disastrous HOA meeting were some of the longest in Karen's life. She had always been the one calling the shots, making sure everyone followed the rules she deemed necessary for keeping the neighborhood perfect. But now, her authority was crumbling faster than she could repair it. Neighbors who once nodded along with her demands now avoided her calls or gave her polite but distant smiles when they passed her on the street. The whispers about Alex and his solar panels only grew louder, and Karen felt the weight of their disapproval pressing down on her. Desperate to salvage what little control she had left, Karen decided to take matters into her own hands. She marched over to Alex's house one afternoon, determined to strike a deal. When he answered the door, she forced a tight smile and said, "Can we talk?" Privately. Alex raised an eyebrow but stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. Once inside, Karen wasted no time getting to the point. "Look, Alex," she began, her tone uncharacteristically conciliatory. "I may have overreacted about the solar panels. If you agree to drop this whole issue and stop causing trouble, I'll make sure the HOA drops all complaints against you." Alex crossed his arms and studied her carefully. "That's generous of you, Karen, but I'm not the one holding things up here. The HOA is the one that cut me off from the grid, remember? And my company isn't going to provide backup power until there's a clear commitment to supporting renewable energy." Karen's jaw tightened. She hadn't expected him to push back so firmly. "Fine," she snapped, dropping the pretense of politeness. "What do you want? A parade? A medal? Just tell me how to fix this." Alex sighed, leaning back against the counter. "It's not about me, Karen. It's about doing what's best for the community. You wanted standards. Well, let's set a new standard, one that encourages sustainability instead of punishing it. My company can help make that happen, but only if the HOA agrees to amend its policies." After a tense pause, Karen reluctantly agreed to bring Alex's proposal to the next HOA meeting. Though she hated admitting defeat, she knew she had no other choice. Without backup power from Alex's company, the neighborhood remained vulnerable to outages, and residents were growing restless. At the meeting, Alex presented his compromise. He would reinstate grid support immediately if the HOA officially amended its bylaws to encourage eco-friendly upgrades like solar panels. He also offered to host a free informational session for interested homeowners, complete with discounted installation packages through his company. The room buzzed with excitement as neighbors eagerly discussed the possibilities. Even those who had initially sided with Karen couldn't deny the appeal of lower utility bills and energy independence. Karen, however, struggled to hide her discomfort. As the vote took place and the majority approved the changes, she sat stiffly in her chair, clutching her pen so tightly her knuckles turned white. When the decision was announced, she plastered on a fake smile and muttered something about progress before excusing herself early. Outside the community center, Alex watched as groups of neighbors lingered to chat, their faces glowing with newfound hope. For the first time, the HOA wasn't just enforcing rules, it was fostering innovation. And while Karen still clung to her pride, refusing to admit she'd been wrong, it was clear the neighborhood was moving forward, with or without her approval. As Alex packed up his notes and headed home, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. He hadn't sought revenge. He simply stood his ground and let the truth speak for itself. And in doing so, he'd sparked a change that would benefit everyone, including Karen, whether she liked it or not. The weeks that followed the HOA's decision marked a turning point for the neighborhood. With the new policies in place, interest in solar energy skyrocketed. Alex's informational session was packed with curious neighbors eager to learn how they could make their homes more sustainable and save money in the process. He walked them through everything: how solar panels worked, the financial incentives available, and even shared stories of other communities that had transformed themselves by embracing renewable energy. By the end of the presentation, nearly half the attendees had signed up for consultations. Karen, however, remained conspicuously absent from the event. She stayed holed up in her house, avoiding both Alex and her neighbors as much as possible. But even she couldn't ignore the growing buzz around the neighborhood. Everywhere she looked, people were talking about solar panels, sustainability, and going green. Some residents joked about starting a solar co-op led by Alex, while others proudly showed off their newly installed systems to anyone who would listen. The once uniform rooftops now gleamed with sleek black panels, transforming the community into a model of modern efficiency. At first, Karen tried to resist the change. She muttered under her breath whenever she passed a house with panels, claiming they still didn't match her vision of perfection. But as more neighbors joined the movement and raved about their reduced electricity bills, her protests began to sound hollow, even to herself. Worse yet, her isolation became harder to bear. Friends she'd relied on for support started drifting away, opting instead to spend time with Alex or other forward-thinking residents. For the first time in years, Karen found herself on the outside looking in. One evening, after another lonely dinner alone, Karen finally broke down. She stared at her reflection in the kitchen window, her mind racing with thoughts of how much things had changed. Her authority, her influence, her carefully curated image, all of it had slipped through her fingers because of her stubborn refusal to adapt. And for what? A few rooftop panels. It suddenly struck her just how petty she'd been, prioritizing aesthetics over progress when the stakes were so much higher. The next morning, Karen did something no one expected. She knocked on Alex's door. When he opened it, he looked surprised but not unkind. "Karen," he said cautiously, "what can I do for you?" She hesitated, fidgeting with the strap of her purse before blurting out, "I want solar panels." Alex blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Then he smiled faintly. "Okay, that's great. Why the change of heart?" Karen sighed, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Because I was wrong. About everything. These panels aren't ruining the neighborhood. They're improving it." And honestly, she glanced down at her feet, her voice softening. "I don't want to be left behind anymore." For a moment, Alex considered pressing her further, maybe teasing her lightly about her earlier crusade. But he decided against it. Instead, he nodded and said simply, "Let's get you set up." True to her nature, Karen insisted on choosing the least obtrusive design, poring over catalogs and peppering Alex's teen with questions about color options and placement. Despite her quirks, she eventually became one of the most vocal advocates for solar energy in the neighborhood, though she always framed it as being practical rather than environmentally conscious. No one minded. Her shift in attitude was enough to signal a new chapter for the community. As the months went by, the neighborhood continued to evolve. Homes that were once indistinguishable from one another now reflected individuality and innovation. Solar panels sparkled in the sunlight, rain barrels collected water for gardens, and compost bins appeared in backyards. Even Karen seemed happier, albeit begrudgingly, as she joined conversations about energy savings and occasionally bragged about her own system. Through it all, Alex watched with quiet satisfaction. He hadn't set out to teach Karen, or anyone, a lesson, but the outcome spoke for itself. Sometimes, the best way to inspire change wasn't through confrontation, but by leading with patience and example. And in doing so, he'd helped turn a divided neighborhood into a united force for good. Months after the HOA's policy change, the neighborhood was almost unrecognizable. What had once been a cookie-cutter community of matching houses and manicured lawns had transformed into a vibrant hub of sustainability and innovation. Solar panels glinted on nearly every roof, rain barrels lined driveways, and flower beds brimmed with native plants that attracted bees and butterflies. The air buzzed with excitement as neighbors shared tips on energy efficiency, swapped stories about their utility bill savings, and collaborated on eco-friendly projects. It wasn't just a neighborhood anymore. It was a movement. Alex's company became a cornerstone of this transformation. Dozens of residents signed up for solar installations, taking advantage of the discounted rates he'd offered during his informational session. His team worked tirelessly to meet the demand, installing systems faster than anyone expected. To celebrate the progress, Alex hosted a green block party in the cul-de-sac, complete with live music, food trucks, and a booth where kids could paint pictures of wind turbines and sunflowers. Even Karen showed up, awkwardly mingling with her neighbors while clutching a reusable cup filled with lemonade. The media soon caught wind of the neighborhood's remarkable shift. Local news stations sent reporters to interview residents, highlighting how a small suburban community had become a model for sustainable living. One reporter even dubbed them Solar Suburbia, a nickname that stuck and brought pride to everyone involved. City officials visited to commend the HOA for its progressive policies, encouraging other neighborhoods to follow suit. For many residents, seeing their efforts recognized felt like validation, not just of their choices, but of the collective power they discovered when they worked together. Karen, meanwhile, underwent a quiet evolution of her own. While she still clung to some of her old habits, like insisting her panels be installed at an angle she deemed less noticeable, she gradually softened her rigid stance on perfection. She began attending community events more often, chatting with neighbors she previously dismissed, and even volunteering to organize a neighborhood-wide recycling drive. Though she never openly admitted it, her actions suggested she was trying to make amends for her behavior toward Alex, for alienating her neighbors, and perhaps most importantly, for resisting change for so long. One crisp spring morning, as Alex walked through the neighborhood admiring the rows of solar panels glistening in the sunlight, he spotted Karen tending to her garden. She waved him over, surprising him with a rare smile. "You know," she said, brushing dirt off her hands, "I might have underestimated you and your panels at first, but I have to admit, this place feels different now. Better." Alex chuckled, leaning against the fence. "I think we all underestimated what we could do if we worked together, including me." Karen nodded thoughtfully before adding, somewhat sheepishly, "Still, don't expect me to start hugging trees anytime soon." They both laughed, the sound carrying across the street as a couple of kids rode past on bicycles adorned with hand-painted signs reading "Go Green." It was a moment of peace, of understanding, and of progress, a testament to how far they'd all come. As Alex strolled back home, he couldn't help but reflect on everything that had transpired. What started as a personal clash with Karen had blossomed into something much bigger, a community united by a shared vision for the future. He hadn't sought revenge or glory. He'd simply stood firm in his beliefs and let the truth speak for itself. And in doing so, he'd inspired others to do the same. In the end, justice wasn't about punishing Karen. It was about proving that kindness, patience, and leadership could spark real change. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, and neither were its residents, but they were learning, growing, and working together to create something meaningful. As Alex looked around at the smiling faces and glowing rooftops, he realized that sometimes the brightest victories aren't the ones you win alone. They're the ones you share with everyone else.